Hi everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Tapman's Teachings. Today we're going to be focusing on legislation that came out of the civil rights movement and this dude named Lester Maddox. I don't think you guys are going to like him very much. But let's go ahead and get started. All right, so you guys have already talked about people, events, and groups within the civil rights movement through your escape room. Thank you to those who did it. I've gotten some pretty positive feedback on that, and I'm sure we will attempt to do that again now that I've worked out some of the kinks, okay? But with the March on Washington, we have Congress being encouraged to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And it was passed. The bill was signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson, who took over after JFK was assassinated. Interesting fact, JFK actually was one of the ones who started this bill before he was assassinated. He was actually upset, visibly upset by the images and videos that he was witnessing on the television of things that were going on down south. So this was definitely something that was close to his heart, and Lyndon B. Johnson just kind of picked up where he left off. So the whole idea of the Civil Rights Act of 64 was the fact that you couldn't discriminate based on gender and race when it came to hiring, promoting, and firing. Of course, people like Richard Russell, people from the South, they strongly did not like this legislation and did not want it to pass, but it didn't matter because it passed anyway. So, of course, people who belonged to the Democratic Party that felt, that believed in segregation didn't feel welcomed, basically kind of just scooted over to the Republican Party. Some segregationists were determined to ignore the law, and they responded with physical violence, and of course that's awful, and boo on them. Most people actually without the violence accepted the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 64. Of course you had people who did not, but for the most part people accepted it. During this time period though, we see a guy named Lester Maddox pop up, and he gained a lot of notoriety for his strong segregationist stance, and he eventually would become governor of the state. Womp womp. So, all right. As you can see here, you have a Lyndon B. Johnson signing the Civil Rights Act of 1964 into place, and then you have Lester Maddox. All right, so Lester Maddox was born in Atlanta in 1915. He dropped out of high school. Don't do it, kids. Don't do it. All right. And he worked several jobs during World War II. Specifically, he worked at the Bell Bomber plant. All right. So in 47, he decided that he was going to leave that life behind, and he opened the Pick Rick Cafeteria near Georgia Tech. And it was only open to white customers. He refused to serve African Americans, or really anybody who supported integration. So you could have been a white person and you could have been like, yo, Lester, I think you should let everybody come and eat in here. And then he'd probably be like, you need to get out. But his restaurant was featured in segregationist literature and had a label, Make-A-Wish for segregation. Yeah, it's like not a cool place to be. And he did gain a lot of fame during that time period because of how outspoken he was. Even had some advertisements in the Atlanta Journal newspaper for his restaurant. There's a picture of the Pick Rick. As you can see, make a wish and a gift for segregation. Sounds like a winner. Not. He's not. All right. So obviously he openly defied the Civil Rights Act of '64. And that caused him national exposure, especially when he chased out 3 African Americans out of his restaurant with a gun. And then later he was known throughout the nation for his use of axe handles. They called them pickrick drumsticks to forcibly remove African Americans from his restaurant. Yeah, not a cool. I don't understand how he became governor. Like, let's get one thing straight. But I mean, nowadays, yeah, no. He temporarily closed the Pickrick, and then later it opened as the Lester Maddox Cafeteria, claiming that he was not in contempt of court because he would serve acceptable Georgians and not out-of-state travelers or integrationists. So as you can see, this is a picture of Lester Maddox and some of his supporters with the pickrick drumstick, although Lester Maddox, if you look carefully, that is not a pickrick drumstick, that is a gun. But also over here, you can see in that picture that there's some news people, so it's like he literally did not care, all right? And of course, his willing to close his business, he would rather close his business than integrate. Well, obviously the courts, they upheld the Civil Rights Act, and Maddox was found in contempt of court because he refused to serve African Americans, and of course he was fined $200 a day for every day that he was open and refused to serve African Americans. 2 months later, that made him close, all right? And then he decided that he was going to enter politics. Because why? I'm not sure. But he was met with defeat the first go-round, but obviously this is a man who does not give up, even when the signs are all very clear for him to do so. So in the late 1950s and early 60s, he ran 2 unsuccessful campaigns for mayor of Atlanta, of course losing to Hartsfield and Ivan Allen Jr., both of them having very different views on segregation. All right, Hartsfield and Ivan Allen Jr. were actually very much allies to the civil rights movement. So yeah, he also ran for lieutenant governor, because remember, you can run as that on a separate ticket. And he lost actually to another segregationist candidate in the Democratic Party. But do not fear, he does not give up. So in '66, he surprised a lot of people by beating Ellis Arnold for governor. So he was elected governor in 1966. What was Georgia thinking? I'm not sure. In the general election, he actually lost the popular vote to a guy named Bo Calloway. But he was selected by the Georgia legislature due to Calloway not gaining a majority. As the last overtly segregationist governor, so he was the last. I'm sure there were other segregationist governors, but he was very outspoken. So he was the last very outspoken segregationist governor in the state's history. He ironically appointed more African Americans to government positions than all prior governors combined. So it kind of begs the question, like, clearly, if somebody doesn't believe in segregation, you would align them with being racist. But if they were racist, would they put African Americans in government positions? I don't know. That's, I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. All right, this is Bo Calloway, in case you're wondering what he looked like. And he eventually became a U.S. representative for the state of Georgia. And he is related to the Calloway of Pine Mountains, and who run and own Calloway Gardens. I don't know if any of you guys have ever been to Calloway Gardens. It's a wonderful place. They have a butterfly house. It's really cool. If you get a chance to go, go. So, more on Lester Maddox. He received he received a lot of support from both white people and black people. Mainly because he hosted these things called Little People Days, and so twice a month he would actually stand out in public, and anybody could hop in the line to meet with the governor and talk to him about different problems. You didn't have to make an appointment. You didn't have to be somebody special. You just hopped in line, you know, and that was unprecedented at the time. Maddox was criticized for not flying the flags at half-mast at the state capitol after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. And after his term as governor was over, due to his constitutional term limits, he then ran for lieutenant governor. So he didn't give up. Once his time was up, he didn't leave. He stayed at the party. So at the time with the governor race, Jimmy Carter was governor. And so Maddox was Carter's lieutenant governor. And of course they clashed. And we'll talk about Carter next week. You guys are going to do a virtual field trip on him, who is still alive, by the way. After his term limits, or the time had passed, he decided to run for governor again in 74, and he was defeated. He also clearly didn't take a hint and ran for president in 76, and obviously he didn't win that either. So he retired from politics. He decided to go back and open several businesses, but none were as successful as his restaurant. He never apologized, though, for his defense of segregation. Like, I mean, to the end, like, that was what he believed. And, of course, he died of cancer at the age of 87. Here you have Jimmy Carter and Lester Maddox holding what looks like some baby lions or tigers. They're so cute. And then eventually, one of his businesses was a souvenir shop. The man opened a souvenir shop in underground Atlanta where he sold his famous Pick Rick drumsticks. Oh. Well, folks, that's all she wrote on civil rights legislation and Lester Maddox. Yeah, so remember, not all history is good history. We just need to learn from it. So, all right. I hope you have found this informative and somewhat entertaining. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. And, yeah, go be great.